Second service, how we doing? That's a good place to be. Hey, it is so good to be with you as we kick off this brand new teaching series, Nothing to Lose. But before we kind of get into that, I just want to catch us all up. Get a little bit neighborhood church sort of business. Hey, here's where we're at. I always want to do my best to keep you all informed. And so let me set up the news I want to give you. And it really goes back to a year ago. So if you were with us a year ago, you know that we celebrated our 75th birthday as a church. We got started in 1948, a young couple, Bob and Lucille Willems, and just amazing. And I tell this story all the time, but just the opportunity that I had to actually go visit Bob and Lucille before they passed and just share all that God's done through neighborhood church. And they just had no clue. I mean, they didn't even mean to start a church. They didn't want to start a church. They just were hanging out with neighborhood kids, and all of a sudden it became neighborhood church, and now we've celebrated 75 years. It's the coolest story to me, and I'm so honored and privileged to be a part of it. But we celebrated 75 years, and it was a great party. We threw a party. Everybody got birthday cake. But as we spent some time leading up to the 75th birthday, we talked about how we reflected on our story as a church. And were there those things that sort of just were a common theme through all 75 years, right? Seven and a half decades. Was there something that kind of rose to the top that said, this is who neighborhood church is? And we said, yeah, we think there is, as we heard story after story of people who've been coming to neighborhood for years and years and years and years. And here's what we said. Here's the one theme, no matter what the season was at neighborhood church over the last 75 years, here was the theme, that the people of neighborhood church in any given season, we could just pull them out, they were always willing to embrace Jesus' invitation into something brand new. That they would say yes. Whatever Jesus was inviting them into, they would say yes to that. And that led us to an amazing question, a challenging question. Would we follow their example? Would we be the kind of people that, like those that came before us, that would say yes when Jesus was inviting us into a new season and to do something new, to kind of grow his influence and love in our city and our community? Would we be the people that would say yes, like those that came before us? So would we have the courage and the faith to do that? And we said, yeah, we hope so. We hope so. We said, yes, let's do that. And we actually rallied, you might remember, we kind of rallied around something that God told the ancient Hebrew people when they were on the cusp of a brand new reality. And here's what God said to the nation of Israel. He said this, he said, see, I am doing this new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? It was this question like, are you perceiving this new thing that I want to do in you and through you? And because of you, will you step in to the new? And we said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And we really did feel like we were being invited into something brand new. And so ultimately we launched what we called our unfinished campaign, as in God's done a lot in and through us over the last 75 years, but he's not done yet. It's unfinished. The work's unfinished. And so we started the Unfinished campaign, and as a result of the Unfinished campaign, we introduced to you two projects. One was kind of smaller. It was right here on our campus, and one's kind of bigger off our campus. And the first one, again, is you walk by it every single Sunday for way too many Sundays, is our what we're calling the Commons, which is just sort of an expanded adult space, coffee shop, outdoor seating, all of that. And here's why we said we wanted to do this. That we believe that hospitality is the simplest way to change the world, just making space for people. And we said, look, we've got a whole chunk of our campus that we're not leveraging very well, that we could actually use it a little better if we made some tweaks. And so the idea for the Commons was born, and I'm very, very excited about it. But here's the update on the Commons that I want to get us all on the same page. We told you when we started it in August, hey, Christmas, woo! Christmas is come and gone, and now I'm hoping for Christmas I'm hoping, so the latest timeline we've been given is end of March, beginning of April, so like Easter-ish time. So pray a lot, like all of you, be praying a lot, because if it's not one thing, it's always the other, but and I get to walk through it every single day, and it's amazing. You guys are gonna love this space. We're keeping it a secret from you on purpose so that we can have a big reveal party and all of that. So, but it's coming, and it's really going to be great one day. So that's the smaller sort of right here. But the bigger project, really the keystone sort of capstone project, was us building a community center in the Houston neighborhood. Right? You might remember we said as we celebrated 75 years, we didn't want to give ourselves a gift. We wanted to give our city a gift. And the gift was a community center. As you know, we've been down in the Houston neighborhood for 17 years as commuters, back and forth, investing in the Houston neighborhood and the Houston Elementary School and the families that make up the Houston Elementary School. And so we said, no more commuting. We actually want to move in and be like Jesus. You might remember Jesus' best friend, his name was John. He actually described Jesus this way. He said that the Word became flesh and blood and moved in to the neighborhood. And so that's us. We just want to follow that example and literally move into the neighborhood. So the idea is that this is a 4,500 square foot building with about 60 parking spaces, large group space, multi-purpose space, conference room, offices, all of that is happening. Now, here's the two things. Here's where we're at with this project. The first thing, many have asked, how in the world is Neighborhood Church going to run a community center offsite and run Neighborhood Church and all of that? Well, as many of you know, we actually, to help do this, we started a separate nonprofit organization to run the community center. So we have a separate nonprofit run by, we just took 2 of our staff members and said, we're firing you from Neighborhood Church, but good news, we have a job opening for you at a nonprofit. And so a couple of our staff moved over, but we've already been so fortunate to have received some pretty substantial grants. And we actually have a staff already of 4 that are helping run all of our programming down in the Houston neighborhood, as well as they're in the market for a 5th staff member. So it's really, really, really cool. And so anyway, we just, as always, and we talk about this so much, we want our love for Jesus here at Neighborhood Church to be defined, demonstrated, and authenticated by how we love others. That's it. That's what we mean when we talk about being for Visalia. And so we are gifting our city a community center. Now, here's the update. Here's where we are with this project. As many of you know, we have been looking for property in the Houston neighborhood. We needed a space. We tried buying churches. No one wanted to sell us their church, that we would remodel and do all of that. And so what we've done is we are in the final stages of purchasing about 2/3 of an acre from Visalia Unified School District. The purchase agreement is literally in our inboxes now. So we've passed everything that we needed to go through, all of the steps. We've been going through that for about a year. If you know, we've already built a park adjacent to Houston Elementary School, but the dirt wasn't ours. The park was ours, but the dirt still remained Visalia Unified's dirt. So we approached them and said, what would you think about sort of selling us the southernmost end of the park, the dirt? And that we'd put a community center on there, then we can continue our partnership with VUSD and be right there, essentially just off the school's campus. So just to give you a reference point, the back end of this community center, that's actually the cemetery is there. So, and everything in front, if you've ever driven by our park, it's still green space, playground, all of that. And so be praying. We are finalizing the purchasing of about 2/3 of an acre on that park. So now we're sort of in the market. We're getting contractors and blueprints and hopefully, permitting, and, we're sort of in that. We'll be in that phase here very, very soon. So that's where we are. That's the update. Just wanted to give you, it's pretty cool. But here's the coolest thing. A year ago, we said, hey, none of this is free. So can you help us out? And you all raised a little bit more than $1.6 million to get this done. So give yourselves a hand because it's really, really cool. The other thing I know is many of you weren't here a year ago, and you're like, what are you talking about? Thanks, this isn't an update. This is all brand new information. And then some of you just forgot that you should help. So it's not too late. All you have to do is go to ncvisalia.com/unfinished, and you will find sort of everything, all the details, and just an opportunity for you to be a part of that. And we'd love for you to be a part of that. Again, we say all the time around here, our best days in the neighborhood are in front of us, and that this is the opportunity of a lifetime. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. I can't wait. I cannot wait to drive by the community center just knowing that my family and I, we had a hand in building that. that wouldn't be there without the sacrifice that came from at least a little bit from us and from so many of you. And so I hope you take advantage of the opportunity because I think it's going to be really, really cool. Okay, that's the update. You guys ready? You ready to dive in? Nothing to lose? So here, I have to tell you about a decision I made that I'm still on the fence about. I don't know. I've added to my job description. I am going to continue to be the lead pastor of Neighborhood Church, but I've added to my responsibilities the head coach of the girls' tennis team at Redwood High School. My wife's first response was, "When are you planning on doing that?" Right? And I said, we'll figure it out probably. But I've never coached a tennis team. I love tennis. I've played tennis, and I'm so excited. It's going to be my daughter's senior year, so I'll get to coach Emma her senior year. But I've committed actually to 2 years, so we'll see what happens. And I really am excited about it. But if you know me, you know that I try not to do things kind of halfway, and so I've never coached a girls' tennis team. In high school, I've just coached a girl. Her name's Emma, my daughter, right? So I've never really coached like all of it. So I'm kind of terrified. So I've been already we don't even really start practicing until June, but I've been to like coaching workshops and watching stuff online and even reading books about tennis, real page turners, I can tell you. And one of the books that I've been reading is really great. Is a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. The Inner Game of Tennis. Because if you've ever played tennis, you know you're just sort of out there. It's just you and your opponent, and it's somewhat, your mind can get filled with all sorts of nervousness and self-doubt. And honestly, one of the biggest threats to the mental game of a tennis player is that you're out there for like a couple of hours and you can lose concentration. You just lose focus. The next thing you know, you just lost the last 3 games, right? It can be a real challenge. And what I love about the inner game of tennis is that they just highlight that tennis, and in fact, Jimmy Connors, famous older tennis player, said this, that tennis is 90% mental. Tennis is 90% mental. And I think he's right. Now, he stole that from Yogi Berra, who said that about baseball, that baseball's 90% mental. And I think they're both right. Baseball, tennis are very elegant, very sophisticated sports for thinking people, unlike the barbarians that play soccer or football. It's okay. I'm just kidding. Like everyone in Visalia plays soccer. But I love tennis and I love baseball, and I think they really are 90% mental. And what's interesting about the book, The Inner Game of Tennis, is they highlight an attitude, an approach that you can take mentally that can be summed up simply as this nothing to lose attitude, right? Nothing to lose attitude. Nothing to lose attitude is just where you sort of abandon yourself to the game, right? It's letting go of the concern of outcomes like winning or losing or making mistakes. You just sort of let all that go and you just kind of dive in head first, you go for it. The nothing to lose mindset opens up sort of this fearless determination where the athlete sort of perceives there's no consequences, there's no risk, so I'm just going for it. And oftentimes the athlete will take bolder risks. They'll play more aggressively. They'll play at their highest level of effort because they're not afraid of messing up, right? The nothing to lose mindset is like it clears the noise, liberates you from pressure, right? And now the door's open, right? And you can just push your limits, right? So that's the nothing to lose approach. And it's honestly like if you follow any sport for that matter, it's why underdogs sometimes upset opponents that are superior to them, right? Because an underdog sort of adopts that nothing to lose attitude, mind's clear from distractions. As a result, the athletes, people who study like peak performance, the athletes, the underdog can oftentimes, when that nothing to lose attitude is adopted, they enter into what's called flow. Flow. Now here's how we can define flow. Flow is the mental state where individuals are fully immersed in an activity, experiencing a focused and energized concentration. Right, so during flow, individuals often are performing at their peak, right? Heightened sense of like creativity and productivity and just overall kind of vibe for the game. And here's the thing, flow, nothing to lose, that's not just for sports. Like you can find flow in just about any activity, right? Art Artists talk about being in flow. Writers talk about experiencing flow, playing an instrument, of course, acting on a stage, delivering a sermon, right? But, I'm just flowing up here. I'm just making it up as I go. You guys, right? Something pretty amazing happens when we get out of our own way and begin to live like we've got nothing to lose, right? I mean, just think about it in your own life. Like, have you ever experienced, flow? Right? The result of sort of taking on that nothing to lose state of mind. And again, almost anything, starting a business, growing a business. I mean, we can all experience flow in any number of ways. Now, there's actually a guy who tried to attach this nothing to lose sort of mentality to faith, and actually more specifically, why people should become Christians. It was a philosopher, mathematician who lived in the 17th century. His name was, you've probably heard the name, Blaise Pascal. And he's kind of a weird guy. But one of the things that's somewhat famous about what he wrote, today we call it Pascal's wager. Maybe you've heard of Pascal's wager. Now, here's the big idea of Pascal's wager, is that according to Pascal, you cannot come to knowledge of God through the existence of just reason alone. You're never going to figure God out and be like, I know he exists, like I know it for sure, right? That's never going to fully happen, right? And so he says, so because you can't ever sort of get all your questions answered and know for sure that God exists, well, the wise choice then in that situation is just to operate as though God does exist, because in that decision, you have everything to gain and nothing to lose. That's Pascal's kind of idea for what Christians might call evangelism, like getting people to convert to Christianity, right? Pascal's wager is like, what do you have to lose? What do you have to lose, right? Because if you live as though God exists, and he does indeed exist, Pascal argues, well, you gain heaven, right? That's awesome. But if he doesn't exist, what have you lost? What have you lost, right? But here's Pascal's argument. It's a little harsh. If, on the other hand, we live as though God does not exist, but he does really exist, well, not only have you lost heaven, but you've gained hell, right? And so Pascal's like, come on. What? Why wouldn't you? Let's go, right? And his argument is this. If you weigh the options, the rational choice is to live as if God exists. That's the best of all the possible choices you can make when it comes to you and the divine, right? In fact, here's it from his own pen. Here's what Pascal says. Either Christianity is true or it's false. If you bet that it's true and you believe in God and submit to him, then if it is true, you've gained God, heaven, and everything else. If it's false, you've lost nothing, but you've had a good life marked by peace, and then, of course, the illusion that ultimately everything makes sense. He goes on, if you bet that Christianity is not true and it's false, you've lost nothing. But if you bet that it's false and it turns out to be true, you've lost everything and you get to spend eternity in hell. Pascal, you dang, dude. Right? So, are you tracking? I mean, again, he's into math. I mean, I don't, this guy's just kidding, math teachers that are here. We have a lot of them for some reason that attend Neighborhood. So we love you. Math's important. It is. So now, a math teacher, or someone married to a math teacher. So, hey, I'll say this about Pascal's wager. Listen, it is not foolproof thinking, right? It's critiqued a lot, and there's some very, I think, worthwhile criticisms of Pascal's wager. That is not the point. My point was just to show you that this nothing to lose attitude. I mean, people apply it to everything, even why you should become a Christian. But I don't think Pascal's also totally wrong. I think he's on to something, maybe. And really, I think it speaks to the big idea of our conversation over the next 3 weeks. So this series, Nothing to Lose, it's just 3 weeks. And if someone asked you over the next 3 weeks what you're learning at church, here's what you can say to them. You're not going to remember this, but I'm just letting you know now. When you grasp the essence of your life through the lens of Jesus, you realize there's everything to gain and nothing to lose. That's what we're going to be talking about for the next 3 weeks. That when you grasp the essence of your life through the lens of Jesus, you realize there's everything to gain and nothing to lose. Now, if you're new to Neighborhood, just know we call ourselves a Jesus church, and so everything we talk about around here, it always is going to land on Jesus. We just think Jesus is the model for what it means to be a human, and so we kind of look at the life of Jesus and we say, yeah, what did you do? We kind of want to see if we can't do that too. And so when it comes to really the power of perspective, and that's really, we want, as a Jesus church, to ask the question, okay, well, what does it look like for us to have the same perspective that Jesus had? That we would actually look through the lens of Jesus when we looked out at the world, right? And when we do, the Christians argue that that's life-changing. That when you begin to take on the perspective of Jesus, that will change your life and make you better at life and make your life better. I think oftentimes we can underestimate the value of perspective, but your perspective, your point of view, the lens you're looking at everything through, that colors all aspects of your life, right? It's your identity, your relationships, how you learn, what you care about, the choices you make. It's all determined by how you're seeing the world, the lens you're looking at the world through, right? Now, Christianity makes the argument that seeing the world through the eyes of Jesus is your pathway to the best version of yourself. That's the argument, right? That's the claim, right? And so specifically, over the next 3 weeks, all I want to do is just kind of ask the question, are there some habits out there that I can adopt that will help me see the world through the lens of Jesus? Are there some things I can do that I can adopt that will help me sort of put on Jesus-colored glasses as I look out into the world, right? And for sure there's more, but I want to say at least, and more specifically, I think these are the sort of drums that get beat often by Jesus and by the other authors of the Christian scripture. We call it the New Testament. They again and again come back to, if you want a Jesus perspective on life, there are 2 things that you need to start doing in your life. And here are those 2 things. Be content with what you have and be generous with what you have. That's it. Be content and be generous. Be content and be generous. That's it. That's all we got to do. Now, the problem with that is those tend to be the hardest things for us to do, right? Right? It's just hard because, and today I just want to talk about contentment. Today, contentment is hard because, honestly, we're Americans, and contentment is anti-American, right? We don't do contentment. We love discontent. Let's go. Let's build it. Bigger, faster, stronger, all that, right? We love accumulating. We love consuming. I just make words up. We just go with it. It's fine. Someone just said, you're in the flow. Just go, Well said, whoever that was. Well said. Right? But that's American, right? Go big or go home, right? American is not, no, we're good. I'm good, right? That's not typically how our culture operates. In fact, there's a phrase that I've heard people in recovery say a lot. I don't know who said it first or where it comes from, but this is just from people in recovery. I've heard this phrase a number of times, and it's anything you need more and more of is just not working. Now, obviously, people in recovery, they're talking specifically oftentimes about substances and things like that, but this is anything. If you just need more and more of it, it's not working for you. Even if you can't not open Instagram, it's not working for you, right? You know you're addicted when it's never enough. And for the most part, it can be anything. And because for us, growing up in an American culture, this is always true of us. There always seems to be that thing that I think I don't currently have. Do we have, there it is. That thing that I think I don't currently have that I think will give me what I actually want most. Isn't that true? There's just always that thing I think I don't currently have that I think will give me what I actually want most. And here's what's fascinating. This is totally not just like an American problem. This is a human problem. It's a human problem. Humans have been discontent for as long as there's been humans. In fact, what I'd like to do is I want to read you a portion of an ancient letter written by an early adopter to the Jesus movement. His name was Paul. And he actually writes, it was so bold. He's so bold in saying this. He writes, I've discovered the secret of contentment. That's what he says. Which I'm like, okay, anyone that's making that claim, I want to at least ask, okay, well, what is it? Right? What's the secret? So here's what this guy Paul, got to remember this. This is the most important thing. The context from which this guy Paul's writing. He writes the phrase, I've discovered the secret of contentment, from a prison cell awaiting his execution. That's important. It's very important for us to remember. So don't forget. Don't forget. So, okay, here's what he writes. We're just going to walk through the passage and just kind of see where we land. Here's what he writes. I rejoiced greatly in that the Lord at last, I'm not in flow. Whoever, like that's, I rejoiced greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. So here, Paul, and again, sometimes today we call him the Apostle Paul. That's why you see that down there. He's the Apostle Paul. It's kind of a big deal. His writings, some of the most influential writings in the history of the world. So it's important we look at it. He's writing because he's writing to a church, some Christians, in a city called Philippi. So we call this letter Philippians. And he's writing to the Philippians because they're helping him out. When you're in a Roman prison, they don't feed you or give you water or anything. And the reason they don't is they don't care if you die. In the Roman world, when Paul was there in the first century, you weren't in prison like for a sentence. You didn't go to prison for like a year or 5 years or 10 years or whatever. They didn't do that. If you went to prison, you were just waiting your turn to get executed. So if you died prior to your execution, whatever, right? It's easier for them. So if you wanted to live while in prison, people had to help you. So he's just thanking the Philippians. Hey, thanks for sending. They sent him some money. Thank you for sending the money so I can get some water, so I can get something to drink, all of that. And so I could keep writing letters that will end up changing the whole world. Now he goes on. And he's saying this. I'm not saying this because I'm in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. Now, that's absolutely true. Paul, prior to converting to the Jesus movement, was an elite. He was a social elite. He was a religious elite. He was the upper echelons of society and had everything he wanted. He was not poor. He was wealthy. And now he's writing a letter in chains, waiting for his execution date, having nothing, literally dependent. His survival is dependent at this point on people like the Philippians giving him gifts. And he's saying, in both of these worlds, I've learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. Already, I'm very interested, because I'm like, really? I mean, if we run out of milk, I get complaining, right? I'm just like, why don't we have milk? That's it. My world's over. But Paul seems to say, I've figured it out. And then he says this, and here's what I've already mentioned to you. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. What? Okay, Paul, what's the secret? I gotta know, right? Here it is. Here's his drum roll moment. Here's the secret. I can do all this through him, Jesus, who gives me strength. What? What does that even mean? So Jesus is the secret? Now, I do want to... we got to talk about this line. If you're a Bible person, you've been around church for a while, you've heard this line, right? I can do all things through him who gives me strength. You've heard that line before. But I think we get that line wrong a lot. Because remember, I told you not to forget, he's writing this while waiting his execution. I think we read that line, I can do all things through him who gives me strength, through the lens of our achievement-focused culture, right? I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Again, this speaks to us Americans, pioneering outlook, break the barriers. A wall's meant to be torn down, right? Climbed over. Nothing's impossible, right? We want to achieve great things. And again, it's not all wrong, so please don't hear me like if you've achieved things like, oh, you're a bad person. No, it's fine. But if we say, I can achieve great things, and when I do achieve great things, we say, well, it's just because I added a little Jesus. I don't know that that's what Paul means, right? That Jesus is just like the secret sauce in the recipe, that Jesus is just like the Christian's added edge when competing in sports, business, or anything else. This is going to get touchy what I'm going to say next, so just especially for those of you that are Golden State Warrior fans and Steph Curry's like a hero. I hate Steph Curry's shoes. I hate them. You know this? He writes this, I can do all things on his shoes when he plays a game. Now, before you walk out and never come back to neighborhood church, I love Steph Curry. I think he's great. I've watched him since he was in college. Phenomenal. I love his faith. I just think he's getting this passage, this line wrong. We have to remember that Paul's writing these words not after he won a basketball game, not after he got the big raise at work. He wrote it while awaiting execution in a Roman prison. And it's only when we read the verse through that lens that Paul's intent, I think, becomes clear. The strength that Paul has received from Jesus is not the strength of achievement. It's the strength of contentment. He's been given the power of serenity even in the worst circumstances, like hunger, poverty, imprisonment, death, those things. This is the opposite, I think, of how many of us have read these words. Because again, we see contentment oftentimes as anti-American. We don't even know contentment is anti-American because we're so drenched in American culture. And so we actually celebrate those whose discontent sort of drives them to achieve more and more. And again, it's not like achieving more and more is a bad thing. Understand, there's nuance here. But Paul is not speaking about his ability to achieve all things. Rather, he's speaking about his God-given power to simply endure all things. He's losing here. He's about to be murdered, right? Properly understood, these words are about learning to accept loss, not promise victory. Paul's point is Jesus will give us the supernatural power of contentment, the ability to endure all things, not beat everybody else, right? Now, here's the last thing I'm going to say. This isn't a magic trick. I don't think you just okay, I'm sold for us. I'm going to go home and be like, I'm on Team Jesus. And then tomorrow you're going to wake up and you're going to see the world through this rose-colored glasses and you'll be perfectly content. That's not how it works. I think where Paul is, writing a letter, a short letter, he can't say everything in the letter, when he says, yeah, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. I think there's a secret to that secret. Like, how do we get that strength then? Like, how do we do it? What can I do to tap in to the strength that allows me to be content no matter what the circumstances, even in my losses? Where do I get that? So I think again, it's just about essentially prioritizing how we see the world. And I think in this case, let's just imagine I have two buckets up here. I think I have a picture of two buckets for you to see. And here's going to be my argument, that all of life fits into these two buckets. And knowing what to put, and there's the names of the bucket. Bucket 1 is surrender bucket. Bucket 2 is stewardship bucket. Knowing what circumstances go where is the secret to the secret that taps us in to the strength of Jesus and allows us to be content. Now, surrender, bucket number 1, this is stuff out of our control, right? I mean, this is like the weather, right? Traffic, canceled flights, your boss, or if you're sitting next to your boss, it's another coworker, you can just say it like that, right? News headlines, other people's opinions, responses. You have no control over that stuff. And in that, I think Paul would tell you, and the other New Testament authors and Jesus would tell you, just surrender that. Surrender that to Jesus. You can't control it anyway. Just give it to him. Trust him. Don't complain about it. I'm working on that one. Don't fight it. Don't try to maneuver yourself out of it. Don't dwell on worst case scenarios. Don't fear. Just, if you can't control it, stop trying to and put it in the surrender bucket and let Jesus have it, right? Surrender the situation to Jesus. Let him have control fully and completely. This is yours, right? Let him do the deeper work in your life when you do that, when you just sort of offload all this stuff you can't control and you just put it in the surrender bucket, right? Here's the stuff I can't control. It's yours, Jesus. I'm out. That's bucket one, surrender. Let him have control over those things in your life that you have no control over. Bucket number two is the stewardship bucket. Now, stewardship is kind of a weird word, and we don't use that a lot, but just think management. Like you're in charge. You do have some say over the stewardship bucket. You have some choices to make in the stewardship bucket. The opportunities that you're going to have this week, right? People are going to invite you to lunch. People are going to invite you to dinner, maybe a job opening, whatever it is. You're going to have some choices to make, opportunities. Some relationships. You have choice over the people that you're in relationship with for the most part. I get it, it's family, it's a thing. But in that case, you have a choice about boundaries, right? And all of that, right? And so many of you, oftentimes we don't steward relationships well. We're in relationships with people we know full well we should not be in relationships with, and they're not good for us. We know full well that we have some relationships where they're a little too codependent. We need some boundaries and different things like that, and we're just not putting them up. Right? We're not stewarding those relationships well. We're not managing them well. Your time and energy, right? Your time and energy. Many of you, if all you say all day long is, I'm busy, I'm tired, I would say to you, you're not managing your time and energy well. You're not stewarding that well. Your money and your finances, of course, you have a choice to make with the money that you have. Regardless of how much it is, that doesn't even matter. Little or a lot, you still have a choice. You get to manage that. Your response and your emotions, right? We say to our girls all the time when they're really mad, hey, it's okay to be mad, just not mean. Right? It's okay to be mad. Mad is mad. Like, that's just an emotion. Just please stop throwing things at me, right? That's like, so, that only happens in my house, I'm sure. So, your goals, your habits, right? These are the things that we can control. We've been entrusted with these things. And now we have a responsibility to manage them or steward them. Well, because here, if you're new to the whole Jesus thing, Christians believe everything is Jesus's. Like, none of it's ours. Like, from your money to your mind, it's Jesus's. It's his, right? He's the king. You're not the king, right? That's the approach, right? But you do have a role to play in some things, the stewardship bucket, right? You've been entrusted. Think of it like this. Jesus is the owner, but you're like the property manager, right? You're the landlord, so to speak. He's the king, but while he's away, we're invited to be good stewards of his stuff, to make the choices that he would make with his stuff if he was here, right? And again, it's way bigger than just your bank account. Again, it's your time, it's your energy, it's stuff you're thinking about. it's all of it, right? So really, it's like, how would Jesus handle the opportunity that I've been given? How would Jesus, if he was a husband, or if he was a wife, or if he was a girlfriend, or a boy, or a parent, how would he handle this situation? And then we do that. What would Jesus do with all the time I have? What would Jesus do with the money I have? It's not mine. I'm just a steward. I'm a manager. I'm the property manager of all the stuff that Jesus is anyway, right? Christians don't really ask, what am I supposed to do with my stuff? Christians ask, I try to imagine what Jesus would do with his stuff if he was here, but he's kind of given me a little bit of say in it, so now I got to kind of imagine what he's doing, right? You get the point. So we have two buckets that define all of life. We've got the surrender bucket, and we've got the stewardship bucket. And I don't know about you, when I was thinking about this teaching, I realized something. I realized that I waste a lot of energy trying to change things I can't control. I put a lot of time and energy on stuff that should be in the surrender bucket, but I've put it in the stewardship bucket, and you know what that's led to? Discontent, right? It's led to me actually being exhausted, and because I'm exhausted, the stuff that should be in the stewardship bucket, I don't want to deal with, so I just put it in the surrender bucket, and now all my priorities are whacked. They're all messed up. And so now I've got stuff in the surrender bucket that should be in the stewardship bucket, and I've got stuff in the stewardship bucket that should be in the surrender bucket, and you want to know what kind of life that is? That's a life filled with discontent. That's a life that is not tapped into the strength of Jesus that says, you can do it all through my strength. I've actually distanced myself. When we put stuff in the wrong bucket, we distance ourselves from the strength that Paul's talking about, the secret to contentment. And so I never give you guys homework. And so here's the homework. This is what I did. And so I want you to do it too. Because it's not a fun homework assignment. You're actually going to be like, oh my gosh, I am a mess. But that's the point. That's the point. So I want you don't have to draw buckets. Maybe just 2 columns, surrender and stewardship. And I want you to write everything in your life you know you need to surrender. You know you need to give it to Jesus because you have no control over it. Right? So give it to him anyway. He's the king. Be like, this is your mess, bud. Right? And then I want you to go over to your stewardship column, your stewardship bucket. I just want you to write everything that you know you have a little say in, that you've been entrusted with some things, with opportunities and time and energy and relationship. You've been entrusted with all sorts of things. And I want you to just make a list, and I just want you to see maybe where you've put surrender stuff and stewardship stuff and surrender, and it's led to some of the discontent in your life, rather than the capacity to tap into the strength that's waiting for you in Jesus, that Paul says is actually the secret to contentment. Okay, are we okay? I mean, we've talked about a lot today. I mean, we talked about construction, we talked about tennis, Steph Curry's shoes, and buckets. I hope there's a takeaway in there for you. But I'm going to pray. And then as soon as I say amen, a good friend of mine, Stephanie's going to come out and just kind of wrap things up and tell you, hey, don't forget. But when she comes out, I kind of want you to clap for her because remember when I told you we fired a couple staff members and then said, hey, we have like a great new job opportunity for you. Well, she was that person. So she's running her and a woman named Shelley Bowman were both on Neighborhood Church's staff, and they now are running the nonprofit. So just, clap for her as soon as I say amen, okay? Father, thanks so much for this morning and, for Neighborhood Church. It's just so amazing that we get to be a part of this really long story that's, now 76 years old, and that you just keep entrusting us with the opportunity to tell our city about how much you love them and help us as a church to be good stewards of that. That you've given us some choices, and we want to keep coming to you and saying, okay, we want to say yes to this new thing, but give us the strength as we prioritize as individuals and as a church what needs to be in the surrender bucket and what needs to be in the stewardship bucket. And so, Jesus, we just love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen.